Then it's November 1993, and the New South Wales government increases the reward for information related to the killings to $500,000, and the case starts gaining national and international news interest. Meanwhile, the police developed a profile of the killer. Except at first, this profile didn't narrow things down too much, and investigators were faced with weeding through a bunch of data. Basically, at this point in time, they had too many suspects to go through. Eventually, various independent reports led the police to develop suspicions about the Milat family, in particular, Ivan. But they had no firm evidence linking him to the crimes. He just kind of matched what they think the killer would be. Remember, Ivan had been working as a truck driver for about 20 years at this point, a job that gave him exposure to people hitchhiking, But some were also thinking that the murders could actually be the work of several killers. And for a while, they thought it was more than one person. So police were actively investigating the possibility of there being multiple, or Ivan had an accomplice. They really didn't think this guy was doing it on his own. They pointed out that most of the victims had been attacked while they were in pairs, which maybe meant that there were, again, multiple murderers. And then on top of all of that, the bodies, when they were found, they were all buried separately. So it felt like a lot of work for one person, is what the police are thinking. He had to have help. How is he doing all this? Then there was a major break in the case. Remember Onions? Paul Onions? Yes. Paul Onions comes to the friggin' rescue. Let me tell you, Paul Onions, great name. So Paul Onions, the British guy who escaped when Ivan gave him a ride and then tried to rob and kill him. Yeah. So Paul's back in the UK. He's living his life. He's moved on. But because this has turned into international news, it actually made it back to the UK. And Paul hears about the murders going on and the location that they're happening in. And this is exactly where Paul got attacked. And he's like, this has got to be related. I'm going to call the police. I love Paul because he did the right thing. So in November of 1993, Paul told authorities that he had been backpacking in Australia back in 1990. And while on the road, he hitched a ride from a man who called himself Bill. Now, as they made their way down the highway, Paul became uncomfortable, unsettled by the questions that this guy Bill was asking. He was asking if anyone knew where Paul was headed, for example. Was anyone waiting for him? Bill also asked Paul if he had ever done any special forces training in the Navy. Just normal get-to-know-you questions, We're not sure how Paul responded to this Q&A, but less than half a mile away from Belangolo Forest, Bill, aka Ivan, ends up pulling out a gun. He then tried to tie up and rob Paul, but Paul, he's like, well, no, he fights back. Somehow he manages to escape, okay? And he's running, and he's running. And I was watching this interview with him, and he was saying, the one thing I learned is if you're ever being shot at, to run in a zigzag, because, they won't be able to shoot you. So he ran in a zigzag while Ivan was shooting at him, but he was able to escape. You go, Paul. My gosh, poor guy. So Paul escapes, and he's able to flag down a passing driver. Now, apparently, this other driver also saw the attack. They both described what Ivan looked like, and they also gave police what kind of SUV the guy was driving at the time. Ivan at this time was driving a silver Nissan Patrol. But you might remember in the beginning where Paul had told authorities what had happened, and they were like, hey, we're probably not going to find the guy, but good luck to you. Well, apparently his report had indeed gotten lost in the mix, unfortunately. That is until investigators refined Paul's statement in 1993 when Paul had heard about the other murders and had contacted the Australian police. So they're like, oh, let's go looking in our records for this one. So detectives see a connection between Paul's attack and the Belangolo. It's a fun one to say, but it seems like a lot of bad stuff happens in this forest, but it's a fun word. But detectives see the connection between Paul's attack at the Belangolo forest murders, okay? And so Paul ends up flying from the UK to Australia to help with the investigation. And honestly, with the help of Mr. Onions himself, authorities were able to close in on Ivan.